Hello, hi guys. Thanks for joining us this evening. If you don't know me, I doubt that many of you don't, but if you don't know me, I'm Kerrin. I work for Betfair in Australia. I head up our automation team. Our remit is to help drive automation on the exchange. And one of our key focuses is to help develop the community in the automation space. So people who are interested in modeling, in dev, in automation, we find that the more that we come together as a community and share experiences, learnings, knowledge, we all win from that. So we're, as Betfair, we're very keen to support that, and it's been great to see that the community develop over the past couple of years. So why do we invest in this? Automation is a big part of the vibrancy and the liquidity on the exchange. A lot of our let's call it product on the shelves comes from our automated community, so we really understand the value of this group. But also more holistically, our mission is to create more winners. And to do that, you need knowledge, you need insights, and you need support. So that's what we're here for, both in terms of the sessions that we facilitate, like this one, but also supporting the community more generally. Speaking of community, if you're not already, I suggest having a look at the Betfair Quants Slack community. Really vibrant, engaged, community-owned space where, there's an awful lot of activity on there. And people are really willing to jump in and help out, answer questions, share their experiences, their learnings. Ivan's just shared the link in the chat. So if you want to, very welcome to jump in on there. There is a meetups channel, which is where people would often communicate during something like this. So maybe go and take a look at that. Any questions we don't get to tonight, our guests, Nakul and Arunav, have kindly said that they might jump in and answer those on Slack later too. So if you want to converse that way, it's a good way to do it. If you're watching this later on YouTube, which I know a fair number of people do, and you're keen for an invitation to the Slack group, feel free to shoot an email to me and the guys, automation@betfair.com.au. will get to us and we can shoot you that link. Equally, if there's anything else that we can help you with on your modeling and automation journey, please reach out. Again, that's the email address to go to, and we'll do what we can to help along the way. So this evening, how will this play out? So we are heading into summer, which is awesome. I'm really enjoying the light, the longer days, and the warmth. But I'm also looking forward to cricket, which is one sport I actually have some interest in of all the sports that are around. Anyone who knows me knows I'm not a particularly big sports fan, but I do like cricket. I grew up watching a lot of cricket with my grandparents back in the day. It's something I actually know a little bit about compared to other sports. We thought that in sort of recognition of the T20 World Cup that's just wrapped up, but then heading into our summer of sport and Big Bash, that it was appropriate to have a cricket focus for tonight. Now we've got a couple of the guys from Wiki, who are a sports analytics startup, on tonight, and they've got a particular passion for cricket, but also focus on cricket data and analytics, modeling and simulation. So I am really keen to talk to them and hear your thoughts on what they've got to say too. So there's their website link down there, Wicky.ai. Through this evening, if you've got any questions for the guys, don't be a stranger, don't wait. There's the Q&A box. Feel free to drop them in there or on Slack, whatever, and we'll try to get to as many as we can. That is my intro. Now, Ben, my wonderful tech manager, Ben, do you mind bringing Nakul and Arunav on, please? And we'll give them an intro. So Nakul is the main founder, right, of Wiki, is that fair? And Arunav is your main data scientist. Is that fair, high level intro?
Fair enough.
Ooh.
Yes.
Before I butcher it, Nakul, do you want to give a bit of an intro to what Wiki is, where you come from, and your background? And then Arunav will hear a little from you.
Sure. No, sounds good. Look, I'll do a quick intro to Wiki first. So look, Wiki, you might have seen a company called Sport Tech Daily for the last 18 months. So that was our old name. So quick bit of background, my background. So I'm based in Sydney. I ran a data science and analytics recruitment company and was in that industry for 5 years. So I was sort of introduced to the world of tech without being a technical person myself for a few years. And just before COVID, early 2020, I realized that, this definitely isn't what I wanted to do for the next 10 years. So I was trying to think of, what is it that I want to do longer term? And being someone that was, born in Mumbai in India and grew up in Sydney, I've been obsessed with cricket my whole life and sport, whether it's rugby league and AFL as well, like sport's been pretty much my only passion aside from friends and family.
Not to play into any cultural stereotypes.
Yeah, not at all. Yeah, but Mumbai and Sydney are pretty much a perfect mix for cricket. But no, anyways, look, so essentially, I was telling my sort of friends and family, look, I'm not a millionaire, I'm not a technical person, and I pretty much know no one in sport and sports analytics. But it would be cool to do something different. And it did sound silly at the time, but I basically made the decision to start a sport tech podcast. And again, not knowing anyone in the industry made it hard to get that first guest, but I initially made a couple of connections, and we launched a very basic website called sporttechdaily.com. And so between, I think the first podcast episode we did, it was literally like the day that coronavirus got announced in Australia. And this isn't, I guess, funny, but it's pretty funny now thinking back on it. But the office that we did the podcast episode in had a COVID case. So basically on Monday, I'm thinking, I've just started a sports company. The world's just shut down and I might potentially have COVID. So it was a pretty disastrous start to the company. But within about 2 months, I think we'd done like 20 or 30 podcast episodes. We had more than 50 Zoom calls or phone calls with people in, sports science, sports analytics, people who've done PhDs in sports science or analytics, people who are working in the industry, people who are working in fantasy or sports betting. And I basically became from an outsider to someone that was sort of like had a website and was known in the industry within 2 months. And it was awesome. And especially for like the AFL community, I know there's a lot of jokes on Twitter about Moneyball and how it's used, but 7 or 8 years ago, not knowing anyone in sport or this sports analytics concept was very foreign. I actually, the way I got introduced to it all was Moneyball, like the Brad Pitt movie. So essentially going from there, I was like, oh my God, this stuff must be so advanced. And if you follow the NBA, the EPL, even the IPL with cricket, they've obviously got the money and the resources to, I guess, go a lot further than what we've been able to predominantly in Australia in sports analytics. And those sort of first 50 or 100 conversations made it really clear to me that as much as we're a very passionate sporting country and sports science, we're one of the leaders in the world, we've got a long way to go in sports analytics. And I thought, look, this podcast stuff is awesome. And firstly, Kerrin, thanks for having us on, by the way, I forgot to say that. But as cool as the podcast and sort of media side is, it would be awesome to start a tech company. So look, the last 18 months, we've hired data scientists, we've started building predictive models, we've obviously transformed into Wiki and are a product tech company now rather than like a sports podcast or media company. So yeah, it's been quite the journey.
And you've had some interesting partnerships come on board recently too, haven't you?
We have, yeah. So we're just about to announce it, so I might not say it on here, but basically we're some trying
exciting names.
Yeah, some cool names, and we're essentially trying to partner with people in the fantasy or the sports betting world as a starter. And obviously a bit of a dream would be to work with some of the franchises in whether it's the NRL or BBL, etc. But we'll get to that stuff later. Before I do a quick personal introduction, I'll let Arunav introduce himself. One of my main philosophies is try to hire people smarter than yourself. And we've definitely tried to do that with Arunav.
Very good philosophy.
Arunav, I'll let you do a quick introduction.
Thank you for telling me I'm smarter than you. But so I'm in my final year studying in actuarial studies and commerce degree. So I'm not directly into data analytics, but more in towards the insurance side and modeling. I've been in Wiki for the past 12 months, and I've worked in a lot of different projects in cricket as well as NRL. And it's really combined my passion of both cricket, just like Nakul, I also play cricket for UNSW, and it's a fun experience in working on cool models and showcasing it to the public.
Interesting. A lot of our community are from financial backgrounds, that it's far more the sort of actuarial quant background that that's not to say we don't have any data scientists. We have a lot of data scientists as well, but probably more coming from finance than pure data science. So yeah, that definitely you're in good company.
Yeah, and I don't want to I guess I don't want to talk about this for too long, because I know we're here to talk about cricket analytics and modeling, but just on that note of finance, one of the main reasons why I thought it would be cool to have a company in sports analytics is because, you know, I was from that recruitment world, and I got to see what companies like a Quants or a Woolies or a CBA were able to do with data science and machine learning and analytics. And then you speak to people actually working in the sporting industry, so not sports betting is pretty advanced in Australia, but outside of that, like the actual franchises or clubs, and there is a very, very stark difference. So that's where we saw the opportunity. And just last note, personally, Arunav mentioned we both play cricket, but it's pretty embarrassing for me to say I also play. I play pretty much the lowest level of park cricket, and Arunav is only a couple of grades away from playing first grade for UNSW. So we do both play cricket, but at a very, very different level. But in the last sort of 24 months, I've gone from 10 years of not, you know, pretty much not having anything to do formally with cricket to now playing cricket, coaching our juniors team. We've started a local park cricket team. We work in cricket. I play fantasy and sports betting for cricket, and watch a lot of cricket on TV and at the SCG whenever we've got a chance. So it's been a roller coaster 24 months.
So help me out on the fantasy stuff. So obviously fantasy football is big. Fantasy AFL within the Australian context is big, and I know anything from Australian context, big is a relative term, but is big. Fantasy cricket, where does that stack up in terms of like popularity? It isn't one that is hits you around the face as much, you know, it's not on the front page of the newspaper the same way. Just give me a bit of context. Where would you think the popularity sits for cricket, both here but also internationally at the fantasy level?
I love that you asked this question, and I'll take this one because Arunav is more of a purist. He's much better at cricket, and he obviously does the technical work that we do with cricket. But on the fantasy side, so as a kid, even before fantasy sport was a thing, I remember in the late 90s, I would sit down with a piece of pen and paper and make like my own fantasy cricket teams and stuff. So I've been obsessed with this for like 20 years. But more on a modern note. So there's something called Dream 11, which is like a fantasy sporting game in India. And they're so big, they sponsored the IPL, and, you know, the Indian Premier League in India, you can imagine sort of how much of a money machine that is. They sponsored the IPL last year. So there's a couple of companies called DraftKings and a couple of others, DraftKings and a couple of others in the US. I'm pretty sure it's a multi-billion-dollar industry. Sorry if it's not that big, but it's huge, and it's been huge for about 10 years because obviously America is only recently legalizing sports betting. But in Australia, so I'm sure most of you guys have heard of Supercoach, which is sort of fantasy sport in Australia. So rough numbers, I believe AFL Supercoach gets about roughly 200K. NRL Supercoach gets roughly 150K users or entries, and BBL Supercoach I think is roughly 100K. So with the growing popularity of Big Bash, especially this year, from what I can see, they're really promoting it on social media with like Shane Warne and Mike Hussey and stuff, and it's still obviously a few weeks to go. And on top of that, just the Big Bash in general is becoming quite popular. So I think the fantasy implications of that, and also there's Draft Stars, which is the Australian daily fantasy sport version, which is a combination of fantasy sport and sports betting. So the Australian fantasy landscape is I think growing at a really impressive rate in the last couple of years, especially.
That's a really good answer. A lot of these I'm familiar with basically all the platforms that you shared. I just know most of them within more of an AFL or NFL context as opposed to cricket. But that's really good to know. And I know that a lot of the guys in the community are interested in the sort of the fantasy AFL stuff. So it'll be interesting to hear, and hopefully you guys as in community can share like in Slack or whatever, you know, your experiences. Sure. But any of you have done anything in the the fantasy space too, because it's interesting how often that then can grow into something a bit more serious and a bit more, from my world, a little bit more interesting again.
Yeah, yeah, no, 100%. I think just sorry, quickly, last note I'll say is when we started doing all of this work early last year, it was all experimental. So it wasn't that, we'd signed a client on and we were doing work for them. It was like, hey, let's just have a think about who is interested in numbers within sport. And our first sort of couple of starting points were fantasy sport and sports betting. So we were just doing a lot of experimental analysis work or model building on fantasy sport and sports betting. And that's how all of this started. And it's just sort of snowballed in the last 12 months.
Yeah, and it's, again, I've seen some stuff you have on the horizon and it's looking pretty cool. So I'll be very keen to see how that plays out. I gather that you guys have a bit of a simulator to share with us before we get to sort of formal queries from the floor. Do you want to dive into that? Arunav, you're doing a screen share, right?
Yeah, so Nakul will start the intro and then I'll move into more of the technical side.
Yep. I'll do a very basic intro. So basically, I think I mentioned, obviously started last year, we started to work on a lot of experimentational projects. We started off with rugby league because that was the first sport that started up post-COVID. We started looking at a little bit of cricket in the Aussie summer. And then this year, we're just about to start working on basketball as well. So we've chosen these three sports for now, but definitely AFL will be one of the sports that we'll have to start getting into come 2022. But so just quickly on, I guess, the first 12 months of our company, as I said, a lot of experimentational stuff. We did have a lot of fun doing that, but then we had to make a decision at one point, like, we've got to transition from just having a whole few to what the sort of commercial opportunities are.
Serious.
And, we had meetings with Cricket Australia. We had meetings with, I guess, a few other people sort of involved actually within sport in Australia. And that sort of general, Tableau dashboards or general analysis was pretty cool to look at, but wasn't what was going to pique their interest. So the sort of resounding message was, if you can build a model or if you could build a tool that can help us, recruit or help us sort of build our teams, that might be a really cool way for you guys to sort of pique our interest. So I think it was about March or April this year, after Arunav had been with us for a few months, we made the decision of, hey, let's think about how we could potentially play out a whole cricket game and build out a simulation tool. And that's pretty much where I'll stop talking and I'll hand it over to Arunav because he's been on the project for the last 6 months end to end.
Yeah, sure. So initially, when we started the cricket simulator project, Nakul had a vision on what he wanted. He wanted that we incorporate the two teams and it should simulate a match. The difficult part was that in cricket, when you're trying to simulate or when you're trying to build a model, it has a certain quantitative sense and it also has some classification components. So for instance, if a person's scoring 1 run, 2 run, 3 run, it's more quantitative. However, there's also extras and wides and no balls incorporated within it. That's why like a simple classification model, such as like GBM or random forest, would not be very efficient in this case. So, and we also wanted to include a bit of randomness to our simulator so that every game is simulated randomly or every game has some sort of differences within it. So the way we went about it is actually interesting. It was an idea from one of my colleagues who actually studied actuarial studies as well. And we actually took an insurance concept to actually build the simulator. So you must have heard about no claim discount or something for insurance concepts, right? So if you don't have any claims or you move on to a lower discount level or move on to an even lower discount level. So usually this is dependent on like, actuaries usually build a model which has the probability of a person moving down the discount schemes. So that's how it went. What we thought of was that in cricket, there's actually states. So just like we have different discount levels, in cricket, we have different states. For instance, moving to 1 run, 2 run, 3 run, 4 run, 6, even a wicket. So everything you can move into different states. So for instance, if it's a dot ball first, it can move into the next ball can be a 1, it can be a 2, it can be a 4, it can be etc. So what we went on to was creating a Markov chain simulator. So in this, we actually calculate transition probabilities for each batsman against any particular bowler per ball. So what happens is that we take a chain of balls for that batsman that they've ever played in their entire like season or career, and we create a probability of how often do they move from a dot to one based on who the bowler is bowling, or based on what venue they're playing, or moving from 1 to 4, or moving from 4 to 6, or getting out the next ball. So we calculate these probabilities through these chains of balls. It's different to a normal model where you have predictors. For instance, you would have the batsman, the bowler, what venue you're playing, etc. In this case, we're kind of putting in the chains of balls. We're actually putting in the raw data as the probability dependent. So I'll give you an instance. So for instance, a batsman is batting and a bowler is bowling. He takes a single, right? A new transition probability is created for that new batsman who's on strike based on that same bowler bowling. Now, pretend that batsman gets out. Then a new transition matrix is formed based on the next batsman coming in and their chains of balls and their bowler. So based on these little chains ball by ball, we actually simulate an innings. So there's about, so the simulation goes for about 120 balls or up until 10 wickets have fallen. That will be the first innings where we allow it to grow to as many runs or as low runs as possible. And in the second innings, we add other constraints. So for instance, we will add the constraint that we only take those chains of balls where they're chasing a total similar to the first innings, or where the run rate is in a particular instance. And in that case, that's how we will go about simulating a match. Yeah, so that was our simulator. I can show you. We had like a simple sample that we actually simulated, like of 100 simulations, and I can show that to you now.
Please. And with this one, just help me out, Arunav, are you simulating this all pre-game? So kind of like a Monte Carlo style approach.
Monte Carlo simulation, yes.
It's a similar.
Absolutely.
So it's not happening live necessarily, but this is the next ball and then we're going to, okay, it's more of Monte Carlo.
Yeah, you got to actually spot on. So these transition matrices, probabilities are actually utilized through Monte Carlo simulation. Each of those little balls are simulated.
Wow.
Which is, yeah, so I can share my screen. So this is the page where we just simulated South Africa versus Australia. We have two, because we don't know what's going to happen in the game, whether they're batting first, whether Australia is batting first or whether South Africa is batting first. We do it for both. So let's just pretend we'll just do it for Australia batting first. And based on all our simulations, we got the average runs that the batsman would score, the balls that they will face, the fours that they will hit on average, the sixes that they will hit, and their strike rate. And the average, if you add it up, will be the total average for those 100 simulations. We have the same thing for the bowling. So for instance, Mitchell Starc bowls 4 overs and on average gives about 29 runs, takes about 1.2 wickets and economy rate of about 7, which is what we went for. And same thing is for South Africa in terms of Quinton de Kock or the South African bowlers, for instance. And not only that, we also went on to, because we have such granular data, we have data based on every single ball of an innings, we can actually go on and about and see how many times David Warner has scored 11 to 20 runs in our simulation. So how many times have he's gotten out in the first like 10 runs that he scored? How many balls does he usually face in each of those simulations? How many fours, how many sixes does he hit? So we can get to a lot of granular depth in terms of our simulator. And the same thing works for bowling. We can look at how many wickets, how many times do they take, how many wickets would they take in an inning? So how many times they've conceded 0 to 10 runs, how many times blah, blah, and how many times they've taken 0 wickets, 1 wicket, etc. So it allows us to, it's not only just a simulator, but it also allows you to get match details, like in-depth match outputs. So like a normal model would just give you an output of, okay, this is the score that's going to be. But in this case, it actually takes into account those chains of balls and actually creates a more realistic and more holistic view of a cricket match.
That's awesome. I love things where you can then visualize it. That really helps.
Yep.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, sorry, just a couple of bugs on there because we haven't released this to the public yet. We were almost there by the end of the World Cup, and then we thought, look, instead of going live with a couple of games to go, we'll just wait for the big bash and launch it properly. So I think I noticed the runs conceded was runs scored. But anyways, I think one thing that we've kind of learned is with any of these really complicated projects. I think we started this in April or May last year, and it was so overawing and so daunting. And then because I was literally speaking to someone at Cricket Australia and a couple of other people with a lot more sort of data science experience than me, just to sort of get advice on this project. And they sort of admitted themselves that this would probably take me a few months, let alone us who are obviously newer to this world than they are. But one of the other things that we realized is, I think it was 2 or 3 months ago, and I remember there was a day where Arunav sent me a screenshot, because the first approach that we took was, let's not worry about individual batsmen to bowlers. Let's think about the team as a whole and phases of the innings, and let's try to nail that first. So we spent maybe 2 months trying to do that. And there was one evening at like 6 p.m, Arunav sends me this screenshot, and it perfectly lined up between predicted and actual runs. And I've just gone, oh my God, we've solved it, we've done it. So I was sort of telling everyone I knew, hey, we've nailed it, we're going to announce it soon. And then basically the next day we did a check of, okay, well, how are the batsmen and the bowlers going? And we realized it pretty much almost made no sense. So, you know, we did have part of the problem solved. And basically we realized, all right, well, then we spent the next 2 months trying to go, all right, let's look at batsman v bowler, which is what basically I've talked you through. And then now we realize that we've got at least realistic outputs for batsmen and bowlers. So we're relatively happy. We've got some finishing touches to make, but luckily we've still got a couple of weeks till the big bash. So we'll be able to release it by then.
It was something I wanted to ask when we talked to Tony Cork a few months ago on a similar meetup. One thing that he talked about was his approach to sort of team-based modeling versus player-based modeling. And it's interesting that looks from the outside that you've started with more of a team-based model and then migrated across to a bit more of a player-based model. For you, so he had both. He had the two separately, and then he also had sort of one where he superimposed the two. Do you think your final one is going to be purely player-based, or do you think it'll be that sort of joining of the two, or do you have an opinion on it?
Arunav, I'll let you take this one to start, but I've got something to add at the end.
Yeah, sure. So in terms of player, so initially you started off with like team-based, right? We talked about how our inning structure goes according to team and how it goes according to, however, the player runs was so generic in the sense that the top order would get like the highest runs, and then it would not take into account if I put in some really good batsman in the middle. For instance, it was just like a generic T20 match, right? Yeah. When we add in player stats, we can actually go into, when we add in like more player specific stuff, we can actually add into player characteristics. For instance, if we're putting in the best 11 we can possibly think of, there should be
different numbers.
it should give you different numbers, which the team-based did not. Team-based was still based on the grounds and how it usually goes in a T20 match. But in a player specific level, if we're putting in someone like Virat Kohli, Steven Smith, Rohit Sharma, all the guns in one team, you would expect those player stats and the team stats to actually grow with how the players are performing. So it does correlate together. So we are focusing on player, but that player drives what the team does.
The team.
So I think it takes both of them into account.
And I think it makes a lot more sense that way, because I remember the way that we tested this, because we saw that actual versus predicted stuff, and that day that we were super happy with it. Next day, obviously realized that it made no sense, is because the way we tested that approach was I think for the guys out there that follow the Big Bash especially, we put, I think it was like Jordan Silk and James Faulkner. And then on the either side of them, we put Andre Russell and Sunil Narayan. So we basically put like super aggressive batsmen with like slower batsmen and saw what the outputs would be. So with our old approach, it pretty much went, oh, we don't care who these guys are. If they're higher up in the batting order, they'll be better. That's
agnostic.
It. Yeah. But then when we went to this new approach, it was really, really cool, because we saw I think we put Andre Russell at 6, for example, Sunil Narayan at 4, and then like Faulkner and Silk between them. But then you saw that like Silk would score more runs than Russell, but Russell would be predicted to hit more sixes, but not fours. It was very as a cricket fan, you just take a step back and you look at it and it made sense. And that was the moment we're like, okay, cool. So we know that at least for now, this is the approach to take.
It's so interesting in this space, because obviously there are people who model sports that they're passionate about. But then there are people who just model things that they think are worth modeling. And if you're coming at something with no subject matter expertise or insight into the data that you're looking at, I remember a colleague back in the day starting to model racing, and he asked me what the rail was. Now that's a bit like asking what the stumps are. You know, it really like it was interesting. It's really hard to then step back and go, what can I do a sense check? Does my output make sense? And it's amazing. It's so easy to get into the details, right? And to, you know, I'm sure, Arunav, you end up with your head all the way in the middle of a model, but to just then step back and go, actually, this is well out of whack.
And it actually works really well for us because, you know, Arunav and the rest of the team, their job is to be into the data, and like,
and you can have the context.
Yeah, like coincidentally, we've happened to hire people. Like I always say, when we're hiring, you know, a data scientist or a software engineer, we're not hiring for you to, you know, follow cricket or basketball or whatever. We're trying to hire, you know, the people within our network or that we get to know that are super talented, and we love them to be part of the team. Coincidentally, Arunav and a couple of our other team members happen to play and follow cricket, so they do have that understanding. But I guess one thing that they don't have is none of them are, you know, into even casual sports betting or fantasy sport or any of that stuff. Whereas because I don't have a technical background, my sort of, I guess, introduction to this space was fantasy sport and sports betting, you know? So I don't know if we discussed sort of like applications of our tool, but one of the big pieces of advice, because I remember when that day that we kind of, it became apparent that we'd worked on this thing for 3 months and it wasn't going to be useful from a player point of view, was obviously like a pretty frustrating day, right? So I keep in touch with a few people that I know from the data science and analytics market in Sydney, people that used to be clients of mine, or maybe just people that I knew really well in the market, just because I know that, you know, obviously they've done this at a much bigger scale than we have, and there'll be really useful bits of advice. And one of the things that they told me was, look, like, you're trying to sort of solve everything with the same model. So just have a think about like, what is your end purpose, and why don't you build the tool accordingly? So then I remember we had a bit of a chat internally, and we realized that, look, if we are looking at more team specific stuff, we can still, it's not like it's disappeared. We still have the script for our first simulation script, right? So we can still use that for the team stuff, but for the player stuff, that could be useful for sports betting, like, you know, player runs and what's called overs and unders, or for every batsman's runs. It can be useful, like we can build like a team over and under runs model as well. Like there's an unlimited amount of stuff we can do, especially with like player prop markets these days. You know, you can have a lot of fun with that. But also from a fantasy sport point of view, companies like DraftStars and Supercoach, one of the other things that we're doing is we're actually building predictive models. So we've got projections for them, because I think that's one of the other areas of the industry that's really untapped. And there's no reason for there not to be more analytics within that space. If you've got 100,000 people making a Supercoach BBL team, why can't they have access to a little bit more data and insights? So, yeah.
Actually, because a lot more of this exists. Like there is precedence in the AFL space, because the AFL analytical community is really, you know, thriving in Australia, and it has the uptake there has been pretty healthy, which gives you something not to follow but to take confidence from, I guess, that there is an appetite and an audience for it. That's really interesting, and I really look forward to seeing bits of that. So is the plan that the simulator will be available externally on the site for
100%.
once we get into Big Bash?
Yes, it will be. Yeah. So like for the short term, you know, like our website's free, all our data tools, all our content, everything's free to use. Our sort of short-term goal depends on how Arunav goes over the next couple of weeks, but like we're almost there in terms of delivering a product that we'd be happy to roll out. Obviously, we'll make, you know, improvements every week throughout the Big Bash, but what we've got there is ready to roll out. It'll be free and sort of ready to use for the first game of the Big Bash, and I think we were talking about this just before we started the call, Kerrin, but like our plan initially is sort of being in that startup mode of, look, it's not going to be perfect. People might sort of criticize aspects of it early on, but with a cricket common sense check, we're going to get it out there for the start of the Big Bash. And then we'll see things that sort of come up that, oh, well, this is obviously wrong, or we need to tweak this, or we need to do that. And we can do that throughout the Big Bash.
Yeah.
And from a user point of view, we can tweak the front end of the website so that maybe, you've got your one generic tool. You can check it out if you want to as just a cricket fan. But then we'll have a different section where if you want to use this for fantasy projections, or if you want to use it for player runs, overs and unders, we can build a very basic web interface, but that can help you with that. So that would be sort of the plan, at least for the Big Bash. That's
really cool. And it's great to see the sort of thought leadership in the space and just see, the novel approach. I'm really excited. And I love things that make data more accessible. So, UIs that mean that people who might otherwise not find it as accessible are able to engage with something they're really passionate about and maybe learn something along the way. I think it's about the best combination you can have. Obviously, the question I have to ask, and I was going to ask it even before it came up in the Q&A, is how does it compare with reality so far? Obviously, as you said, it is still a work in progress, and I really appreciate you sharing it early. But in terms of comparing model output to what the teams actually do, where are you sitting at the moment? How true to form is it trending?
Cool. Arunav, you want to take the technical side of that question, and I'll finish with the non-technical side?
Yeah, sure. So we're trying to predict something that hasn't happened yet, right? So there is a bit of back testing, and there is an eye test that we usually conduct. I think it's just looking at player-by-player statistics and seeing if, in reality, that makes sense to us. Other than that, just like Nakul said, we did run a lot of test scenarios. For instance, first we wanted to check off whether we are getting player-specific statistics. So we actually made a whole match simulation of just like a really weird combination of a team, just so we can see if it's like a player-by-player statistic, if it's following that. Just like how Nakul said, we had Jordan Silk, we put Faulkner in, we put in some really attacking batsmen, we put in bowlers who don't actually usually bowl. How do they go about it? And that's some of the stuff that we're testing currently. Which we're testing is the player stats being compared. In terms of the team totals, their histograms looks good as well. In terms of most of the scores in current T20 current T20s are around 120 to 190 to 200, but we don't have any excessive scores of 300, etc. We don't have any low scores of 10 runs. So our simulation is taking a good route. And we are going to do more further testing as well.
It'll be really cool, and I know it'll be a little bit in the dev phase and those first few testing and iterate phases. It can be a little bit challenging yourself, and that's what I'm looking for. It's intimidating, I guess, to just compare reality with. But knowing you guys both a little bit, I hope that as we go through those first few rounds of the Big Bash, you'll be able to share, well, this is what our sim said, this is what reality said. And that sort of transparency can help to drive that trust too, right?
Just adding on to that, the simulation that we have is so granular in the sense that it's giving every single ball, right? It's unrealistic to test every single ball and the actual reality of every single ball. There's a dot in this ball. It depends on the simulator, that the person who's actually created the model. Unlike for me, for instance, is determining what you actually test. Do I test the team scores? Do I test how many runs the batsman's given? How many? There's so many aspects that you can actually test, which we're going little by little. First, we're doing the player, then we're going to go into team, then we're actually going to go into how we'll probably go into more of the probability side of how probable it is of a batsman scoring this many runs and looking at it in the realistic sense.
Now you're in my world.
So those are some of the things that we're gonna work towards.
Very cool. And you've done bits in the NRL space, haven't you? Nakul?
Yeah. So the stuff that we've done with rugby league, a lot of that was developed sort of like mid last year during COVID. So funnily enough, the first data scientist that we hired was someone who'd worked in have you heard of a company called GTG Network? They've got another name as well, but I've forgotten it now. But basically, they are a Melbourne-based sports analytics company, and I think they were founded like 10-ish years ago, and they've gone on to do some like really incredible things. And I actually spoke to the founder for like an interview at some point last year, which is somewhere on our site. But anyways, like the reason why I brought that up is he worked at a really successful sports analytics company based in Australia. He then went on to work at one of the sports betting companies in Australia, and then he was working at one of the, I don't know if he wants me to reveal this, but basically he's worked in the sports industry for about 5 or 6 years, extremely smart, extremely good at what he does. And he helped us frame a lot of like our initial database and models and a lot of our initial processes. But I guess ever since then, we've taken the model of let's try to hire, people who are just finishing or have just finished their education. So everything that they've learned is basically the most up-to-date stuff that you can. So we do like it being super transparent. Like there will be scenarios like this one where if you ask me the question of how are you going to test how accurate they are, I'd struggle to not even think about, but even comprehend how we do that. But I think Arunav did a really good job in explaining that we were able to do the team and not just the team totals, but how the totals came about. Like, so we've got, I wish we'd brought it up here, but we've essentially got this like flow chart that shows you ball by ball across the innings, how the team totals were built for 100 different cricket matches, actual versus predicted. And they were like almost inseparable. Like it was really good, like super accurate,
realistic
for that test of 100 games. And then the player based stuff, because it's just so much to look at. It's more being a common sense test, but we'll try obviously to go into more detail obviously in the next couple of weeks.
I'm really looking forward to that. In terms of some of the questions about data and inputs, obviously, so I'll step back.
Yep.
Cricket is super popular on the exchange. We all know that. Even tonight's WBBL, it is WBBL, not BBLW.
No, it's WBBL.
Yeah. The cricket and the AFL just confuse me with the acronyms. WBBL is already at a perfect overround, so it's 100% market. It's as efficient as you can get, which is very rare for women's sport globally. But once you get into the Big Bash, particularly the IPL, the liquidity on the exchange is absolutely insane. We're talking millions matched on some of these markets, and it's absolutely incredible. But there's not a lot of modeling or automation that happens in the space, and one of the reasons we host things like this is to pose to people who are looking for new avenues of exploration. Well, is this something you're interested in? Now, if it's something that someone were to come to and go, hey, this is something I want to have a play at modeling, obviously the two starting things that they need are a data set and some vague point of direction about which features they might want to look at. So in terms of where you source your data, obviously you've got some pretty cool data to be able to do ball by ball. Not asking you to give away the kingdom or all the secrets, but if you were hypothetically to start from scratch, looking into building let's focus on T20 as opposed to any other type model, where would you recommend people start looking for cricket data outside of pricing data, which obviously you can talk to us about if you're keen on wagering prices?
Sure, I can start off with a couple. So I think when we started all of this 18, 20 months ago, a couple of the first ones, obviously Cricinfo and CricBuzz, like, if you've got the capabilities to work with that data, you can definitely start there. There's also, I think Kaggle, I forgot the exact link, but if you Google, Kaggle ball by ball cricket data, I think they've got IPL data sets from memory. And there's also a website called Crick Sheet, and there's another one called White Ball Project or something along those lines. I can put up some links afterwards. Sorry, I forgot the exact names.
No, please.
There's about four or five pretty useful links on how to get started with that. And I think if you're doing it on an individual basis, I think most people based in Australia, me personally as well, predominantly we follow the BBL because it's on at the perfect time. We know all the players, and obviously it's just an easier watch than staying up past midnight to watch like the IPL or whatever else. So if you're predominantly working with Big Bash, there's also, And again, I'll Google and send this through, but I think there's like an R stats package to do with cricket as well. So
if you could share that, because that didn't used to exist.
I'll Google. Ooh, then I might be wrong, but I will Google that, and I'll send through 3 or 4 links. But there's definitely enough out there with cricket ball by ball to get started on from an analysis point of view. And Kerrin, if we've got time, Arunav's got a few things that sort of he's learned in the last 12 months in working with cricket data on R that he's sort of happy to share.
Please, do you want to share that?
Yeah. Oh, like as in he can talk through it at whenever you want. But yeah, there's definitely 4 or 5 very useful links to get started with cricket data.
No, that's awesome, because as I said, you know, we've done this on AFL, and Fitzroy exists, and you know, there are all these things that are already there. Whereas cricket, from my outside view, semi-outside, it feels like it's a bit more nascent, less established. So no, that would be really cool if you're able to share any of that, maybe in the Slack group. And obviously people can go to your site, Wiki.ai. There's a query there asking about the URL. But Arunav, what are your key learnings coming into this? Obviously you've got the passion, but from a data science modeling perspective, what were your...
So like at university, like the only programming language that I usually worked with was R, and that's something that I was really comfortable with, and something that a lot of people just like, they just think of R as like proper, like just statistics. They don't want anything to do with it, but actually has some very good inbuilt, like easy packages to work with.
It does. There are a lot of R users in the community.
And like they're really easy packages to work with, and especially for beginners and anything. I'm pretty sure even Nakul's got a bit of a hang of R now, working on with some easy packages. So a couple of my tips are that, just as Nakul said, that there is an RStats package for cricket data. It does provide you, it's probably not up-to-date data, but it does provide you a starting point on cricket data analysis. I think a few packages that I personally like, the main thing in modeling is having a clean and good data set. So a few packages that you should work with is Tida and Dipler. I think they're very useful. And I know that a lot of people don't really like use R. Like if you find an actuarial like graduate, they'll all use R, but like most people are towards Python. But in R, R and Python are actually quite compatible together, that a lot of people don't know. So the reticulate package in R can be quite useful, where you can utilize Python scripts, and you can actually use really cool R statistical functions as well. So I think those will be a couple of my tips in terms of modeling in R.
Thank you. No, that's R is definitely growing in its popularity, and I know internally we have a bit of as soon as anyone joins in any of our more analytical parts of the business, we have sort of, are you a Python person or an R person? Because there are definitely 2 camps. But internally we're managing to work the 2 in together pretty well, which is good. Which goes in with what you're saying, that the 2 actually can play nice. But no, there are quite a few people in the community who do play in R, and there are good R packages for the API as well, for Betfair APIs.
Yeah, Kerrin, I was just going to say, sorry, like obviously, I keep repeating this, but 18 months ago, obviously, a lot of these things were foreign to me, right? So working with the initial data science that we had that had a few years of experience, and then working with a whole bunch of other people in the team like Arunav and Kabir, everyone seems to have like a certain language or tool that they prefer, but I think the big sort of eye opener for us was when we learned, like Arunav just alluded to, that we could kind of combine the 2. So one of our sort of big projects before the cricket T20 sim was to work with rugby league fantasy projections. And when we were trying to think of how the hell we're going to put this together and create a website front end to that, it took us a couple of weeks of sort of planning, and we didn't really have any answers. And like I had to lean on people outside of our company, a lot of people in my network, to figure out how to put it all together. And it essentially just goes like a connection between your database, R, and the Python scripts within R to then float back onto the database and then to the front end. And like, this might sound really silly and simple for people who've been in the industry for a long time, but as a non-technical person, seeing that happen in front of your eyes, because these guys would be like screen sharing the whole time, right? So seeing this stuff happen in front of your eyes was a massive eye opener. And if you're working, very different if you're working at, Betfair or like a larger organization where you've got larger data science and analytics teams, and much more impressive technical capabilities. But if you're working on this stuff for yourself or with a friend, for example, seeing how it all can work together makes a huge difference, and it's a lot of fun to work with.
And in terms of features, so again, don't give away the kingdom, but if you were to encourage people to start, obviously looking at things like you said, positioning in the order, number of balls, obviously these things start. We had a question in the chat about how much did you consider things like the ground itself, the ground size, the weather, how much are these things you factored, like high level? This is me off the top of my head as someone who likes cricket but has never done anything with it. Where would you be starting? Is this the right sort of route? Are there other sort of interesting insights you can share? Arunav, is that to you probably?
Yep.
Yeah. So first, you need to even if it's cricket modeling, you need to consider what you're actually modeling. Like, what do you actually want to get out of your model? After you found that, I think the biggest thing that me and Nakul have learned is that you should spend a lot of time doing exploratory data analysis. Definitely building your graphs, spending time going through features, and find as many features as you can. The number of features that you can find can be reduced later on through shrinkage techniques, through best subset selection, etc. But try finding things that actually would be correlated to it. And then you can go on about working in making your model more efficient. In terms of the venue stuff that you said, yeah, we do take that into account in the sense that because we only look at those chains of balls, we only look at the chains of balls in that venue. So it does take into account if it's a smaller boundary, there will be more fours and more sixes. So the probability increases, so more are simulated in our simulation engine. And yeah, so those are some of the things that in terms of features, those are some of the things that you should consider.
That's really cool. I've got an interesting one, and I think again it's for you, Arunav. Technical question that's just come in. I'm reading this verbatim. How do you incorporate past data for both the batsman and bowler to estimate the transition probabilities in the model? Would these differ for a particular batsman facing different types of bowling, i.e. spin, pace, Dizzy Gillespie, or would this lead to overfitting in the model? And a continuation of that, if it's runs by Rabada, how does the tail ender get 20s, 30s, even got in 50s? What's the thoughts here?
Sorry, I was just going to say, sorry. I was just going to say, I'm just answering the second. I was just typing the answer to the second one.
That's right. And obviously the two things that are linked, but not, one of them is this is still work in progress. That's fine.
Yeah.
But in terms of incorporating the past data, how does that play in?
So like what I told you, it's based on each batsman. We take a chain of balls of each of the batsmen that's played in that venue, firstly. Secondly, we take in every single ball Rabada has bowled in that venue. We create another transition matrix, which is based on only those balls that have been bowled by Rabada to that batsman. And we also take into account another matrix, which is all the chains of balls that have actually been bowled in that venue in that particular phase in the innings. Having multiple transition matrices, it's not specific that we only take those balls where Rabada is bowling to a particular batsman, but we take into account a whole subset of balls. We do take into account the entire how a batsman actually starts the innings. That is weighted. That's weighted into, for instance, we give a weighting of 0.4. We then have how Rabada actually bowls at the start of the innings. Then we have another transition matrix of how Rabada bowls to that particular batsman, and they're all weighted together to actually create a one final transition matrix, which then goes through the simulation.
No, that makes sense, and I think again from the outside, but it feels like it'll be interesting to see how that plays out once you've got the sort of live data to work with, and you're seeing it play out game by game, and go, well, actually, we're over predicting this, we're under predicting this, we're overweighting this, and that, as you said, you've eyeballed it and it's feeling right, but now how do you
go about testing it in a granular sense? And that will come with more data that we can get and more testing that we will conduct.
Got another one here, and again, probably your way, Arunav. Looking at individual analysis. So one player may have a strike rate of 150 and an average of 75, but against let's say poor quality bowlers. And then you want to compare a different bat with lower strike rate and average, but against good bowlers. You need a ranking for each to know who's decent or not, ELO, whatever. Does that just come out in the wash, as you said, in that multiple simulation process, or is that an additional sort of weighting that's applied, or how do you go about that? Do you have a...
So like I said, that instead of like having like an ELO rating, for instance, ELO rating would rate, okay, this batsman or this bowler is good. We take chains of balls. So for instance, how that bowler actually has bowled in that particular, we're taking the chains of balls and how those probability, how that transition probabilities work for each of those bowlers. So we're not actually taking into account, like, in a model, we would explicitly state that these are the variables that we're taking. We're taking into account batsman, the bowler, how many fours they've hit, how many sixes, like in the sense that we're aggregating the data, right? In this case, we're putting raw data as creating our probability. It's raw data. It takes into account so many covariates, so many predictors, but it's not actually specifically putting in those predictors. Do you get what I'm trying to say? So there's no ELO ratings there, etc.
No.
But because we're putting into account, like for instance, we're putting like the person said that that how would you compare someone who's facing like a bad bowler or a good bowler, right? It's based on those weightings or the weightings that we have for those transition matrices as well. Where we're putting, if there's like a newbie type bowler who hasn't really bowled, who doesn't have that many balls to actually predict it, we put higher weighting on how the batsman actually bats, or vice versa. If it's a new batsman, we will put a higher weighting on how the bowler actually bowls. That's how we kind of work about on creating the final transition matrix.
Yep, and just to add to that as well. Sorry, I think the other thing, because we've dealt with this problem from the start, and I'm assuming it's a very common problem in sports analytics. But the other thing that we rely on is venue numbers as well. So I might be wrong here, but I think from memory, like for example, as Arunav said, if it's a new batsman with not a lot of data on his batting numbers, we'll rely more on the bowling stats from the bowler, and also the venue, like what the numbers usually look like for the venue. And just on that note, we haven't addressed it yet, but this is one of the things that we want to do pre-BBL is to actually look at like having a team rating system and a player rating system. It shouldn't be as important for the Big Bash as it was for the T20 World Cup, which is why we were sort of hesitating in launching. But for the Big Bash, it should be much easier to control that, but definitely something we'll be looking into.
In terms of running these models, this must be absolutely huge. Just the size of the computations. I know how heavy like a Monte Carlo sim can be. Like, technical question, but I don't know, what are you running it on? Is this just a local machine that's struggling, or are you using some sort of cloud resources you've thrown at it? Like, and how long does it take to run a game, a match?
Yeah, I'm running it on my really old MacBook Air at the moment.
Oh God.
But it does take a little bit longer on my laptop, but it would take about 6 to 7 hours at least of like just running time, and usually my laptop dying twice, but it does run through.
It depends on how many though. Like for example, when we thought of this, like our whole premise was let's try to get the most accurate sims. Let's try to do this properly. But after sort of 6 months of working on it, we were trying to think of like what's actually realistic. So, like the realistic applications of this is eventually we want to do it post toss. So you got the BBL game starts at 7:30 p.m., for example, in Sydney. The toss is at say 7 p.m. You got 30 minutes, right? So you got maybe 5 minutes to figure out who's won the toss, who's batting, who's bowling, what the teams are. So you got 5 minutes there. Then you got 5 minutes, I reckon, to run the sims. And that leaves sort of like 15 to 20 minutes for people to make decisions on betting and fantasy or whatever else they want to do, right? So eventually we're going to have to get there. But at the moment, I think the sort of like middle ground that we've found is if we can run for each team batting first, we try to run 100 sims. And that takes, I think, about half an hour. Is that right, Arunav?
Yeah.
About half an hour.
Yeah, the reason why we didn't go for like initially when I told you we like a multi classification model is because it would literally tear my laptop in half if I tried running that in terms of it. That's why we went for more of a Markov chain transition matrix, because it's a lot quicker to run.
Someday we'll get you onto some hosting, and at least this is like I'm all for doing hacky dev solutions and work locally, because like that lets you move fast, but then it's also something that you can scale, right? Like it's easy to throw computation at that problem down the track and shrink that 30 minutes to a lot less. You know, and you can finesse it once you've got it down. But I find it interesting. It's something we debate round around in the community. We've got particular personality who's stuck with his $1,200 laptop, and other people who are spending more than that each month on hosting. So, and it's one of those sort of funny ones to watch play out. And so, can I extrapolate from that? So I've got a couple of questions here about changes, sort of, you know, at the death knell or once the match starts. So looking at, you know, injuries, replacements, you know, bringing in the 11th man, what 12th. What's you don't account for any of that, do you? It's all pre-off, yeah, at the moment.
Yeah, I'll just answer both of them in one. So we don't account for like injuries in game because obviously we're doing it before the game. But in terms of the second one, we actually found a really simple but effective way in Excel, like with static data, like not doing it for a live game, but beforehand, we found a very simple method to calculate who would bowl what over, and it was relatively accurate. But we didn't have time at that point to like incorporate it in our process. So for now, like for that dummy version that you've seen on the website just then, South Africa, Australia, that's manual. We've just listed, all right, these are Australia's 5 or 6 bowlers. We'll just sort of put Stark in at the start and the end. We'll put the spinners in the middle. It's all manual. But again, by the time that we go live for the Big Bash, we've got it's actually more predictable than you would think to figure out which bowler will bowl when. Like you might bowl a spinner at the 11th over who actually bowled on the 12th or 13th, but you pretty much know that you're like your spinners will bowl in the middle, your gun bowlers will bowl at the start of the end, maybe one in the middle, and like you might bowl a part-timer in the first couple of overs to chop out or like, you know, get an over out of the way. But it's actually a lot more predictable than you think.
Right, that's absolutely awesome. And we've just hit time, so I'm going to wrap us at that. But thank you guys so much for coming in and sharing your thoughts, your experience. I've loved watching you develop over the last sort of 12 months, and I'm really keen to see where you go from here. And I really hope that at the point at which you you know, launch your first full-fledged SIM, that, you know, you share it with us in the community, share a link. I'd love to see, and I'm sure others would as well, particularly as a bit of a you know, an outside view into cricket analytics, and something that hopefully will be more accessible. And I'm really keen to see where those partnerships go, and what the applications look like in this space. So thank you both so much for coming and doing that, and for the questions. And guys, if you've got other questions for the guys, feel free to chuck them in the Slack community. You know, really probably in the meetups channel is the most sensible place, and I'm sure these guys would be kind enough to answer them. Just in wrap up, I hope you guys have a great summer, that the Big Bash plays out well, and that, you know, hopefully we all get to open up and go out in person over the next little while and catch up. But more generally, I hope everyone enjoys the cricket season and the summer. And if you choose to have a play with modelling and or with automation or betting on it, just to make sure that you do it in a way that works for you, that you gamble responsibly, and that you enjoy what you do. Thank you all for coming. Thanks, Nakul. Thanks, Arunav.
Awesome. Thanks for having us on. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for the questions, guys, and thanks, Ben and Ivan. And yeah, I look forward to seeing you in person very soon. Touch wood. Thanks, guys.